During the Tory conference, almost seemingly out of nowhere, here arrived Nigel Farage, and he got a massive fanfare. In fact, there was more buzz around Nigel Farage being there at the conference, talking to people, having selfies with people, than there was about anything else going on at the conference. And Nigel was asked several times, are you going to rejoin the Tory party? And he said, no, he didn't say a definitive yes, but he also really didn't give a definitive no either. Remember, one of Nigel Farage's stated goals was to move the Tory party more to the right. And certainly, as you can see with the future direction and, well, the future potential leadership candidates, of course, being Suella Braverman and Priti Patel, he has sort of succeeded in that regard. But this matters in a way that I hadn't really considered. And I saw this piece by Naomi Smith, and she's part of Best for Britain. And she brings up a very, very good point that this type of Nigel Farage movement has happened before in Canada, where you got someone who dissatisfied with the party, made a new party, dragged that Conservative Party towards the right wing, and then eventually rejoined that party and even became oh dear me, and even became its leader. So we're going to go have a look at this, because if you've never heard the name Preston Manning and why that's important, you're probably going to see why in a moment. But before we do that, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and an donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel. So first of all, who is Preston Manning? What happened in Canada? And what were the consequences of his actions? And what did it eventually lead to? So here it is. So, little considered in British politics is the Canadian right-winger Manning. He is the proto-Farage, the Betamax to his VHS, the version 1.0, and the parallels are stark. A long-time party member, Manning grew frustrated with the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada, or the PCP, and then led a breakaway rump in 1987 and established the socially conservative Reform Party of Canada. Seems awfully familiar, doesn't it, with the current Reform UK? But it continues. It was strongly affiliated with the Christian right and eventually rose to prominence as a populist party, strongly advocating retrenchment of the state, anti-LGBTQ values, and fiscal conservatism. Manning's new party acted as a drag on the PCP. Really sounding familiar, isn't it? Pulling it further to the right. And Reform capitalized on the PCP's 1993 collapse, becoming the main opposition party between 1997 to 2000. And to secure the fortunes of the right, the two parties eventually merged in 2003. So if we know that the Conservative Party is going to collapse potentially at the next general election, do you see, or I could certainly foresee a scenario, maybe even mirroring, of course, this, where Farage goes, I have all those Reform, I have UKIP, let's merge all these entities together into one to create a new Conservative Party in the UK. That's not beyond the realms of possibility. And it certainly sees, as it went in Canada, to potentially maybe going this way. So the two parties eventually merged in 2003 and created the Conservative Party of Canada that we know today. Manning was always more at home with traditional Tories, and now, with the assimilation complete, he was able to take his place as the leader of the mainstream Canadian conservatism, having moved it a good few notches to the right. When Stephen Harper, one of Manning's reforms acolytes, was then swept into power 3 years later as the Conservative leader, Canada then withdrew from the Kyoto Protocols, helping to cement climate skepticism in one of the world's largest and most forested countries. So, if that ever happened in the UK, bear in mind that this crazy right winger version in the UK wants to leave like the European Court of Human Rights, wants to completely trash the UN Convention on Human Rights as well. Maybe that becomes their version of the Kyoto Protocols and leaving that. Certainly seems the way that they want to do it. If you're looking at, as we said, a bizarre parallel of history repeating itself, it really does seem to be going that way. And then, of course, his party was embroiled in a voter suppression scandal involving automated calls reportedly misleading voters on where they could vote. If this sounds awfully familiar, it is because in 1992, Farage quit the UK Conservative Party to form his own populist party, espousing many ideas similar to Manning's, but with a heavy focus on Euroscepticism. 2 decades later, David Cameron promised a referendum, went on to lose it, and his party began to mould itself in Farage's image. The rest is history. The Conservatives are now already implementing voter suppression with the introduction of voter ID to tackle non-existent electoral fraud, and they plan to make climate action a key battleground in the next election. As I said, there's a lot of parallels going on here. Very, very worrying parallels that we probably have to worry about if Farage does sort of succeed in, recombining the right-wing vote. Remember, 25% of like the country votes right wing. 30%, of course, would class themselves as centrist, and of course, you've got 25% on the left. Would this be able to appeal or have maybe enough appeal? Well, maybe that 25% keeps them in power. Maybe that 25% is enough to secure them somewhat decent small majorities. Maybe they then can push ahead with leaving the European Court of Human Rights, trashing all these other stuff. We've seen a party that has currently a massive majority unable to do a lot of this stuff because it's at war with itself. Pri Patel, as you can see the video that they danced within, and Dancing with Farage. That sounds like a really bad TV show. Pri Patel, backed by Carruthers, who has said that he considers a lot of the current sitting Conservative MPs to not be true blue Conservatives. Really, really strange that they are going this direction, but it's not surprising. But it continues. So, this echoes with Farage's own UKIP, Brexit, and maybe not coincidentally, the named Reform UK parties couldn't be louder. And with the UK Tories potentially on the verge of their own collapse, the echoes of history are notable too. If Farage believes that Rishi Sunak's party now fully resembles a very sufficient reactionary, nationalistic, and populist home, he will undoubtedly fold back in. Even Tom Tugendhat would welcome him. And remember, this was once the guy who probably a lot of, shall we say, the more saner Tories represented to them a reset of the party from going away from all these right-wing nonsense stuff. But even he, because he has his own leadership ambitions, wants to go in that direction. So we can see the continuing descent of the Tory party further and further into this right-wing mold pushed by Farage. There's a lot of those echoes, as the article is rightly pointing out, between Canada and, like I say, I never knew of Preston Manning either, but the similarities are there, and wouldn't be surprising if we did see maybe this eventual refolding. Maybe we will. Maybe we will. If the Tories are going to collapse, we've seen them desperately reaching out to Dominic Cummings, apparently. Are they desperate enough to reach out to Nigel Farage? When the Tories get desperate, they do stupid things. Are they desperate enough to reach out to Farage? Because I will tell you now, and I've always said this, if they put the referendum on European Court of Human Rights in their manifesto, then as far as I'm concerned, all votes are off. If you do not like Keir Starmer or anything like that, that goes immediately out the window. You have to get tactical voting. Vote Labour, vote Lib Dem. Beat the Tories, because otherwise we risk a referendum on the European Court of Human Rights. And that itself could cause huge problems already with our withdrawal agreement. And if it should win, I do not want to even think of the consequences that would happen because of that. So we just cannot afford that. We cannot afford that. We just cannot. I would hope that people would recognize that as the serious threat that it is if that were to come about. But anyway, back to it. So even Tom Tugendhat would welcome him. And with it, Farage could bring a rump of support that could breathe back life into Sunak's very asymmetrical electoral prospects. Not necessarily enough to deliver another Conservative government, but potentially enough to deter Keir Starmer from an overall majority. That's true. Year after year, Best for Britain's modelling polls consistently show that when the right forms a regressive alliance where UKIP, the Brexit Party, or Reform UK stand aside to give the Tories a free run, and the progressive parties don't respond in kind, the left is in trouble. What we have been saying for years at this point: vote tactically. If they start to do this, if they stand aside, we've got to do the same. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't, both Labour and the Lib Dems aren't doing this. You want a perfect example? Just look at Nadine Dorris's seat. The Lib Dems and the Labour candidate are just arguing against each other. And unfortunately, I think the Tories are going to sneak away with a win when they really would not deserve a win if they both work together to beat the Tories. This is why any proper true tactical voting is not going to end up coming from Labour or the Dems. It has to be a very grassroots driven movement to make people realize you have to vote tactically, because Labour and the Lib Dems aren't going to engage in it, even though it would suit them down to the ground. And as was pointed out here, if those other parties stand aside, it gives the Tories a free run, and it leads to time and time again progressive tragedies. So Richard Trice is the leader of the Reform UK, but many would say in name only. Farage remains the sole person of significant control of Reform UK's limited resources at Companies House, not Trice. Again, very worth noting that Farage is in control, not Richard Trice of the Reform UK, even though, of course, both men would say otherwise. Both Manning and Farage have demonstrated how our current winner-takes-all system can be used by the far right to spook moderate conservatives into normalizing fringe views. Just look at the Tory conference this week for details. If Labour wins the next election, it should take a look at the last 70 years of UK politics. 46 which have had conservative governments elected on minority votes. And a way up of a system of proportional representation for PR may not serve both them and the country better. This would ensure that everyone votes counts equally, and extremist views could not win total control by hijacking mainstream parties. Populism is poison, and PR and other deep democratic reforms are the antidote. For now, tactical voting will be essential to ensure that in the short term, at least, Farage's new friends are not given another 5 years in power. Once again, making the case for tactical voting and, of course, reforming the voting system and going for PR. Bear this in mind, people. Every single time we say this is how important voting tactically is, and especially at this election, we have to beat the Tories, because if they were to somehow just sneak away with another 5 years of like a minority government, they could do a lot of damage just in that 5 years. We cannot afford another 5 years of conservative craziness. We just absolutely cannot afford it. So spread the word, vote tactically. I really don't care what your views are on Keir Starmer, because to be honest, a 5 more years of Tory government will be disastrous for this government, whereas a Labour government will be far, far, far more better. You may not get everything that you want, but I'll tell you what, you will probably get far more than you would of 5 more years of Tory rule. I can guarantee you that now. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.